Yeah, that's one of the really important themes, I think, for us to keep in mind as we prepare for, 4 years or more or less of Biden presidency, is that he moves over time. And this is the kind of thing that in politics sometimes, the political press will punish a politician for taking one position and then taking a different position a few years later. Biden's not ultimately all that concerned about that. You see, a couple of the sort of prime examples of recent years have been that he was one of the people who endorsed gay marriage before President Obama got there. And at the time, I think people out in the general public looked at that and thought, oh, well, maybe that's just a classic Joe Biden kind of gaffe, as they say. But in fact, that was the product of genuine calculation and realization of where the public was. I mean, he got it. And if you go back over the course of his career, this is a product, I think, to your question, this is like one of the things that's interesting is where does this come from? It's a product partly of the fact that he came from this place in the United States that was very much divided between the North and the South. Delaware is such an interesting microcosm of all of these elements that were in some ways cosmopolitan New York-like, and in other ways, it was still a Jim Crow state when he was growing up. There was still discrimination against African Americans. In fact, I mean, one interesting detail is that African diplomats who were going from Washington to New York, driving through essentially the North, were finding that they were subject to discrimination when they passed through Delaware. So he came up as a senator in this place where he had to figure out a way to meet all of these different elements of his constituency. And that constituency was also evolving and changing. So, he started his career, in fact, before he even got into the Senate, he was actually on the side of civil rights. He'd run for office, having participated in some of these integration protests, desegregation protests in Delaware, but then found once he was there that he was getting beaten up by white suburban parents who were not in favor of busing in the schools. They didn't want to have African-American kids bust into white schools. And so he, in reflection of his constituency, he moved into that position for a while. Now, of course, over the course of his career, he takes some pride in having then eventually, helped the first Black president succeed in office. But that is an example of how you see, as the Democratic Party has moved and changed, so has he. And where does that put us now? I think what's interesting about that is one of the reasons that he is in this position is because he does not get too far out ahead of where the party is. Had he done that, he probably wouldn't have won the primary. And yet at the same time, he has to be alert to the fact that it's going to change over the next 4 years. It's getting younger. It's getting more liberal. It just is. And one of the things you see in his cabinet appointments is an attempt to try to navigate all of those cross currents.